Good morning, and welcome to Wednesday Morning Coffee Break. Hope everybody's having a good Wednesday morning. Hope you've had your coffee. The wisest man that ever lived is Solomon. And Solomon wrote a book called Ecclesiastes. And he begins in chapter 1, in verse 1, that these are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. Man, what a way to start a book. You see, Solomon was searching, and yet there was emptiness in his life. There was injustice, work, death, wisdom. All of these things were part of his life. Let me read some of the things that he said. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come, generations go, but the earth never changes. Sun rises, the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south, then it turns north, around and around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome, beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are never content. He goes on and he says in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes in verse 9, so I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. Then he says, I came to hate all my hard work here on earth, for I must leave it to others, everything I have earned. And who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and my hard work. Some people work wisely with knowledge and skill. Then they must leave the fruit of their efforts to someone else who hasn't worked for it. This too is meaningless. It is a great tragedy. So what do people get in this life? What do people get in this life through their days of labor, hard work, anxiety? At night their minds cannot rest. It's all meaningless. Chapter 3, he says, I have seen the burden that God has placed on all of us. Yet, God made everything beautiful for its own time. He's planted eternity in the human heart. I hope you noticed that. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. And then we get down to chapter 6. Well, actually chapter 5. And Solomon comes to this conclusion. He said, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? He says, there is another serious problem I have seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour. Everything is lost. In the end, there's nothing left to pass on to the children. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. And then we get to chapter 7. And in chapter 7, he says in verse 15, I've seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. And then he says, so don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? And don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? And then he says in verse 18, pay attention to these instructions, for anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes. Well, my goodness, this sure does seem depressing, doesn't it? But Solomon came to a conclusion. In chapter 12, in verse 13, this is the very end of Ecclesiastes. Solomon says this. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. Fear God. And he, as I said a minute ago, he mentioned eternity. You see, this is not all there is to life. C.S. Lewis said possessions, pleasures, prestige, popularity, promotion, power, and performance cannot satisfy our longings in this world, for they were never meant to do so. John 10:10 in the Bible says, this is Jesus speaking, he says, I have come that you may have life, and that you may have it in the full. This life is not, the fullness of this life is not in stuff. And Solomon came to that conclusion, that it's not. Ken Boa made this statement, God designed us for satisfaction in him alone. And he loves us enough that he will not allow us to be satisfied with any lesser things. The wisest man that ever lived, that had everything, came to the conclusion that without God, life is meaningless. Thank you for joining me for Wednesday morning coffee break. I hope you'll think about this. Even go and read this little book of Ecclesiastes written by the wisest man that ever lived. Thanks again for joining me. I hope you guys have a good rest of the week. And I will see you next week on Wednesday morning coffee break. Bye now. God bless you.